Chapter 1, The Night Begins. Lucy stepped out of the small diner where she worked, the doorbell jingling softly behind her. The night air was cool and crisp, a welcome change from the stuffy warmth inside. She took a deep breath, feeling the slight chill of the evening settle on her skin. The street was quiet, only the distant hum of traffic breaking the silence. Her shift had been long and exhausting, filled with the clatter of dishes and the constant chatter of customers. Now, the quiet seemed almost surreal, a stark contrast to the noise and chaos she had just left behind. Lucy adjusted her bag on her shoulder, glancing around as she began her walk home. The dim streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, their flickering bulbs adding an eerie quality to the otherwise peaceful night. Lucy's footsteps echoed softly, a rhythmic accompaniment to her thoughts. She felt a strange mix of relief and unease, relief that her shift was over, and unease that she had to walk home alone at this hour. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself it was just her imagination. But as she walked, the sensation of being watched grew stronger. Lucy's eyes darted to the darkened alleyways and the shadowy corners of the street, half expecting to see someone lurking there. Each time, there was nothing but the oppressive darkness. Her thoughts wandered to the events of the day, the usual frustrations of work blending with snippets of conversations she'd had with her coworkers. She thought of Megan, her closest friend at the diner, and their plans to go out together on the weekend. The thought brought a small smile to her lips, momentarily easing her tension. But the feeling of being watched persisted. Lucy quickened her pace, her heartbeat matching the rapid rhythm of her footsteps. She turned down a quieter street, the buildings looming tall and silent on either side. The oppressive silence pressed in on her, amplifying every sound, every rustle of leaves, every distant car horn. A sudden noise behind her made Lucy stop in her tracks. She spun around, eyes wide, searching the shadows for the source. The street was empty, the only movement the gentle sway of a tree branch in the breeze. She stood there for a moment, heart pounding, before forcing herself to turn back and keep walking. "It's just your imagination," she muttered under her breath, trying to steady her nerves. But the cold knot of fear in her stomach told her otherwise. As she walked, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The shadows seemed to move with her, dark shapes flitting just out of sight. She glanced over her shoulder again, her eyes scanning the darkness. This time, she thought she saw something, a figure, just at the edge of her vision. Her breath caught in her throat, but when she turned to look, there was nothing there. Her pace quickened once more, her mind racing. She could feel the panic rising, the instinctual urge to run. But she forced herself to stay calm, to keep moving forward. She was almost home, just a few more blocks. The streetlights flickered again, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the ground. Lucy's heart was pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. She could hear her own breathing, shallow and rapid, as she neared the corner of her street. Just a little further, she told herself. Almost there. But as she turned the corner, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Lucy froze, her eyes wide with terror. The figure was tall and cloaked in darkness, their face hidden in the shadows. For a moment, they stood there, silent and unmoving, watching her. Lucy took a step back, her mind screaming at her to run. The figure moved forward, slowly, deliberately. The street was empty, the silence deafening. Lucy's heart raced, her body trembling with fear. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the figure vanished into the darkness. Lucy stood there, stunned, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She took a shaky breath, her hands trembling. Without another thought, she turned and ran the rest of the way home, her footsteps echoing loudly in the quiet night. She didn't stop until she was inside her apartment, the door locked securely behind her. Lucy leaned against the door, trying to calm her racing heart. She was safe now, but the fear lingered, a dark shadow in the back of her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still out there, watching her. And she knew that this was only the beginning. Chapter 2, The First Encounter. Lucy tossed and turned in her bed, her sleep restless and filled with fleeting, disturbing images. She kept seeing the shadowy figure from the night before, the way it had appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Every time she closed her eyes, the figure seemed to loom closer, until she could almost feel its cold presence next to her. When the alarm finally rang, Lucy woke with a start, drenched in sweat. She lay there for a moment, trying to shake off the remnants of her nightmares. The morning light streaming through the curtains did little to ease her lingering unease. She forced herself to get up, hoping that the routine of her day would help dispel the dark thoughts clinging to her mind. The walk to the diner felt different that morning. The streets were busier, filled with the hustle and bustle of people going about their day, but Lucy couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her senses on high alert, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual morning crowd, oblivious to her internal turmoil. At the diner, Lucy tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the previous night. She moved mechanically, her mind elsewhere, replaying every detail in an attempt to make sense of what had happened. Her coworkers noticed her distraction, but she brushed off their concerns with a forced smile. "Rough night?" Megan asked during a brief lull in the rush, her eyes filled with concern. "Yeah, something like that," Lucy replied, not wanting to burden her friend with her fears. "Just didn't sleep well." Megan gave her a sympathetic look but didn't press further. Lucy was grateful for that, though the sense of isolation only grew. She felt like she was living in a different world, one where shadows moved with a mind of their own and safety was an illusion. The day dragged on, each hour feeling longer than the last. By the time her shift ended, Lucy was exhausted, both physically and mentally. She dreaded the walk home, the thought of facing the dark streets again making her stomach churn. But she had no choice. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out into the evening air, bracing herself for the journey ahead. The streets were quieter now, the hustle and bustle of the day replaced by an eerie calm. Lucy walked quickly, her eyes darting to every shadow, every alleyway. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, and she couldn't shake the sense that someone was following her. Halfway home, she heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible footstep behind her. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickened her pace, trying to stay calm. The footsteps grew louder, matching her speed. Panic surged through her, and she broke into a run. She turned a corner, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. The footsteps continued to follow, relentless and unyielding. Lucy's mind raced, searching for an escape. She spotted a narrow alleyway up ahead and darted into it, hoping to lose her pursuer in the maze of backstreets. The alley was dark, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp at the far end. Lucy pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. She listened, her heart pounding in her ears, straining to hear any sign of the stalker. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, she heard it, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps entering the alley. Lucy's breath caught in her throat, her body trembling with fear. She could see the shadowy figure at the entrance, moving closer, their form hidden in the darkness. Desperation took hold, and Lucy scanned her surroundings for anything she could use to defend herself. Her eyes landed on a loose piece of wood lying nearby. She grabbed it, her hands shaking, and held it in front of her like a makeshift weapon. The figure continued to approach, their movements slow and menacing. Lucy's grip tightened on the piece of wood, her mind screaming at her to run, to fight, to do something. But she was frozen, paralyzed by fear, unable to move. Just as the figure was about to reach her, a sudden noise broke the silence, a car horn blaring in the distance. The figure stopped, turning their head slightly as if listening. Then, without a word, they turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Lucy alone in the alley. She stood there for a moment, unable to believe what had just happened. Her body was shaking, her mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Slowly, she lowered the piece of wood, her breathing ragged. She had to get home. Now. Summoning every ounce of strength, Lucy forced herself to move. She emerged from the alley and hurried down the street, her eyes darting to every shadow, every dark corner. The feeling of being watched persisted, but she didn't stop until she reached her apartment building. Once inside, she locked the door behind her and leaned against it, trying to calm her racing heart. She was safe, at least for now. But the fear lingered, a dark shadow in the back of her mind. She knew that the figure from the alley was still out there, watching, waiting. And she had a terrible feeling that this was far from over. Chapter 3: The Stalker's Game. Lucy woke up to the sound of her alarm, the shrill beeping pulling her from a restless sleep. She sat up in bed, her body aching with exhaustion. The events of the previous night were still fresh in her mind, the memory of the shadowy figure haunting her every thought. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, and got ready for the day ahead. The walk to the diner felt like a gauntlet. Every noise, every movement in the periphery of her vision, set her on edge. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of someone lurking just out of sight. By the time she arrived at work, her nerves were frayed, and she felt like she was about to snap. Megan noticed immediately. "Lucy, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, concern etched across her face. Lucy forced a smile. "Just didn't sleep well again," she replied, her voice shaky. Megan looked like she wanted to press further but decided against it. "Well, if you need anything, just let me know," she said softly before heading back to her station. The day passed in a blur of clattering dishes and murmured conversations. Lucy tried to focus on her tasks, but her mind kept drifting back to the shadowy figure. She couldn't help but feel like she was being toyed with, like a cat playing with its prey. When her shift finally ended, Lucy felt a sense of dread settle in her stomach. The walk home felt even more daunting now, knowing that the stalker was still out there. She steeled herself and stepped out into the cool evening air, her senses on high alert. As she walked, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound seemed amplified. She glanced over her shoulder constantly, her heart racing with each step. She turned down a different street, hoping to throw off anyone who might be following her. Halfway home, she noticed something unusual, a small, crumpled piece of paper lying on the sidewalk. It seemed out of place, and her curiosity got the better of her. She picked it up, her hands trembling slightly, and unfolded it. Inside was a simple message, written in a neat, almost elegant script: "I see you." Lucy's blood ran cold. She dropped the paper as if it had burned her and looked around frantically. There was no one in sight, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. She quickened her pace, her mind racing with fear and paranoia. When she finally reached her apartment, she locked the door behind her and leaned against it, her breathing ragged. She knew she couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next move. She needed help, but she didn't know who to turn to. Lucy spent the rest of the evening in a state of high alert, jumping at every sound. She kept the lights on, the television blaring in the background to fill the oppressive silence. She knew she had to stay strong, but the constant fear was wearing her down. As the night wore on, Lucy tried to distract herself by going through her old photos and mementos. She found comfort in the familiar faces and happy memories, but the fear still lingered in the back of her mind. She couldn't escape the feeling that someone was watching her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Just before midnight, Lucy heard a noise outside her window. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Slowly, she got up and crept to the window, peering out through the curtains. At first, she saw nothing but the empty street and the flickering streetlights. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement, a shadowy figure standing across the street, watching her apartment. The fear surged through her, and she stumbled back from the window, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. She grabbed her phone and dialed Megan's number, her hands shaking. Megan answered on the second ring, her voice groggy with sleep. "Lucy? What's wrong?" she asked, her concern evident. "Megan, someone's outside my apartment," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling. "I think it's the same person from last night." "Stay calm, Lucy. I'm coming over right now," Megan said firmly. "Lock all your doors and windows, and don't let anyone in until I get there." Lucy nodded, even though Megan couldn't see her. Okay, please hurry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She hung up the phone and locked all the doors and windows, her mind racing with fear. She sat on the couch, clutching a kitchen knife she had grabbed from the drawer, and waited. The minutes felt like hours, each tick of the clock amplifying her anxiety. Finally, she heard a knock at the door. "Lucy, it's me, Megan." "Let me in," came Megan's reassuring voice. Lucy rushed to the door and unlocked it, letting Megan in. The relief was overwhelming, and she collapsed into her friend's arms, tears streaming down her face. "It's okay, Lucy. I'm here," Megan whispered, holding her tightly. "We're going to figure this out together." For the first time in days, Lucy felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone in this nightmare, and with Megan by her side, she knew she had a chance to fight back. But as she looked out the window one last time, she couldn't shake the feeling that the shadowy figure was still out there, watching and waiting. Chapter 4: Seeking Help. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. Lucy lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the events of the past few days playing over and over in her mind. She felt exhausted, her body and mind weighed down by fear and anxiety. Megan was still asleep on the couch, having insisted on staying the night to keep Lucy company. Lucy got up quietly, trying not to wake Megan, and made her way to the kitchen. She needed to do something, anything, to keep herself from spiraling into panic. She put on a pot of coffee, the familiar routine providing a small measure of comfort. As the coffee brewed, Lucy's thoughts drifted to the note she had found the previous night. "I see you." The words echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder that her stalker was always watching. She knew she couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next move. She needed help, but she didn't know who to turn to. The smell of coffee roused Megan, who sat up and stretched, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Morning," she said, her voice still groggy. "Morning," Lucy replied, managing a small smile. "I made coffee." "You're a lifesaver," Megan said, getting up and joining Lucy in the kitchen. She poured herself a cup and took a sip, savoring the warmth. "So, what's the plan for today?" Lucy sighed, feeling the weight of the question. "I don't know. I feel like I need to do something, but I'm not sure what." Megan nodded thoughtfully. "We should go to the police." After breakfast, they made their way to the police station. The building loomed ahead, its cold, impersonal facade doing little to ease Lucy's nerves. They entered and approached the front desk, where a bored-looking officer glanced up at them. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone indifferent. "Yes, I need to report a stalker," Lucy said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. The officer sighed and handed her a form. "Fill this out and take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Lucy took the form and sat down, her hands trembling as she filled in the details. Megan sat beside her, offering silent support. They waited for what felt like an eternity before a detective finally called them into his office. Detective Harris was a middle-aged man with a stern expression and piercing blue eyes. He motioned for them to sit down and leaned back in his chair, studying Lucy intently. "Tell me what's been happening," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. Lucy recounted everything, from the first encounter to the note and the shadowy figure outside her apartment. She described the fear, the sleepless nights, and the constant feeling of being watched. Megan chimed in, adding her observations and concerns. Harris listened carefully, nodding occasionally. When they finished, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "I believe you," he said, his voice steady. "We'll open an investigation and increase patrols in your area. In the meantime, I suggest you stay with friends or family, somewhere you feel safe." Relief washed over Lucy. For the first time, she felt like someone was taking her seriously. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Harris gave her a reassuring smile. "We'll do everything we can to keep you safe, Miss Davis. If you notice anything suspicious or feel threatened, call us immediately." Lucy and Megan left the police station, a glimmer of hope in their hearts. It felt good to have someone in authority on their side, someone who believed her. But the fear still lingered, a dark shadow in the back of her mind. They spent the rest of the day at Megan's apartment, discussing their next steps. Lucy decided to stay with Megan for a while, hoping that the change of scenery would help ease her anxiety. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, Lucy felt a sense of unease settle over her. She couldn't help but wonder if the stalker was still out there, watching her every move. The thought sent a chill down her spine, and she shivered involuntarily. "We'll get through this, Lucy," Megan said, noticing her friend's discomfort. "You're not alone." Lucy nodded, grateful for Megan's support. But deep down, she knew that this was far from over. The stalker's game had only just begun, and she had a terrible feeling that things were about to get much worse. Chapter 5: The Cat and Mouse. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and vigilance. Lucy stayed at Megan's apartment, finding some solace in the company of her friend. They stuck to their plan, taking extra precautions and remaining alert. Despite their efforts, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that the stalker was always one step ahead, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One evening, as they were preparing dinner, Megan's phone rang. She answered it, her face paling as she listened. "Lucy, it's Detective Harris. He wants to speak with you." Lucy's heart raced as she took the phone. "Hello? Miss Davis, this is Detective Harris. I have some news," he said, his tone grave. "We've found evidence suggesting that your stalker has been following you for longer than we initially thought. We discovered surveillance footage from your workplace and the surrounding area. It appears he's been watching you for weeks." Lucy felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you have any idea who it could be?" "We're still working on identifying him," Harris replied. "In the meantime, I urge you to remain cautious." "Thank you, Detective," Lucy said, her voice trembling. "Please keep me updated." She hung up the phone, her mind racing. The thought that the stalker had been watching her for weeks was horrifying. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if her every move had been scrutinized. Megan noticed her distress and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out, Lucy. You're not alone." That night, Lucy couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind a whirlwind of fear and paranoia. Every noise, every shadow seemed amplified, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She got up and walked to the window, peering out into the dark street below. It was empty, but the sense of being watched lingered. She turned away from the window, her thoughts drifting back to the note she had found. "I see you." The words echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder that her stalker was always there, lurking in the shadows. In the following days, Lucy tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. She returned to work, sticking to her new routine and remaining vigilant. Megan accompanied her whenever possible, their bond growing stronger as they faced the unknown threat together. One evening, as they were closing up the diner, Lucy noticed a figure standing across the street. Her heart skipped a beat, and she nudged Megan, pointing towards the figure. Megan squinted, trying to make out the details, but the streetlights cast long, obscuring shadows. "Do you see him?" Lucy whispered, her voice trembling. Megan nodded, her expression serious. "Stay here. I'm going to call Detective Harris." As Megan stepped away to make the call, the figure moved, disappearing into the shadows. Lucy felt a surge of panic, her eyes darting around frantically. She couldn't see him anymore, but she knew he was still there, watching. Megan returned, her face tense. "Harris is on his way. We need to stay inside and wait for him." Lucy nodded, trying to steady her breathing. The diner felt like a small oasis of light in the encroaching darkness, but the fear gnawed at her, making her skin crawl. She couldn't help but feel like a trapped animal, waiting for the predator to strike. Minutes later, Detective Harris arrived with a team of officers. They searched the area thoroughly, but there was no sign of the stalker. Harris spoke with Lucy and Megan, his expression grim. We'll continue to monitor the area and increase patrols, he said. But I need you to be extra cautious. Don't go anywhere alone, and if you notice anything suspicious, call us immediately. Lucy nodded, her heart heavy with fear and frustration. The stalker's game was wearing her down, and she didn't know how much longer she could endure it. She felt like she was constantly on edge, her every move shadowed by an unseen presence. That night, back at Megan's apartment, Lucy sat on the couch, her mind racing. Megan tried to comfort her, but the fear was overwhelming. Lucy knew she couldn't live like this forever, always looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next move. We need to find out who he is, Lucy said suddenly, her voice firm. I can't keep living like this. We need to find him and stop him. Megan nodded, her expression resolute. We'll figure it out, Lucy. We'll find him and put an end to this. Chapter 6, The Turning Point. The next morning, Lucy and Megan sat at the kitchen table, poring over everything they knew about the stalker. They had a list of incidents, sightings, and clues, but no clear picture of who this person was or why they were targeting Lucy. The frustration and fear were palpable, but they knew they had to keep pushing forward. I've been thinking, Megan said, breaking the silence. Maybe we're missing something obvious. What if this person is someone you know, someone from your past? Lucy frowned, considering the possibility. I've been racking my brain, but I can't think of anyone who would do this. I don't have any enemies, and I haven't had any strange encounters recently. Megan nodded thoughtfully. Maybe it's someone you wouldn't expect. We should look into anyone who's been around you lately, even if they seem harmless. They spent the next few hours making a list of people who had been in Lucy's life recently, coworkers, customers at the diner, neighbors. It was a long shot, but they needed to explore every possibility. As they worked, the tension between them and the outside world seemed to grow, the sense of being watched ever present. Later that day, Detective Harris called with an update. We've been reviewing the surveillance footage and cross-referencing it with known offenders. We have a few leads, but nothing concrete yet. I'll keep you posted. Lucy thanked him, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. The police were doing their best, but the sense of urgency was growing stronger. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. That evening, Lucy decided to take matters into her own hands. She suggested to Megan that they visit some of the places where she had noticed the stalker, hoping to find something the police might have missed. Megan was hesitant at first, but she understood Lucy's need to do something, to take control of the situation. They started with the alley where Lucy had first seen the figure. It was a narrow, dimly lit passage between two buildings, filled with the detritus of urban life. As they searched, Lucy's heart pounded, each shadow and sound heightening her anxiety. They found nothing, but the act of searching gave Lucy a small sense of empowerment. Next, they went to the spot where Lucy had found the note. It was a nondescript stretch of sidewalk, but Lucy scanned it carefully, looking for anything out of place. Megan kept watch, her eyes darting to every corner and shadow. As they searched, Lucy's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the message, "I see you." The sender was unknown, but the message was clear. Lucy showed it to Megan, her hands shaking. "He's watching us," Megan whispered, her voice filled with dread. Megan looked over her shoulder, scanning the area. "We need to get out of here," she said urgently. "This place isn't safe." Lucy nodded, her heart racing. They hurried back to Megan's apartment, locking the door behind them. The fear was overwhelming, but she knew they were on the right track, and she wouldn't stop until she found the stalker. That night, Lucy lay awake, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She replayed the events of the day in her mind, searching for any clue, any detail that might lead them to the stalker. As she drifted into a restless sleep, a plan began to form in her mind. The next morning, she shared her thoughts with Megan. "We need to set a trap," she said, her voice steady. "We need to draw him out, make him show himself." Megan looked skeptical. "That sounds dangerous, Lucy. What if something goes wrong?" Lucy met her friend's gaze, her determination unwavering. "We'll be careful. We'll have the police nearby, ready to step in. But we can't keep living like this. We have to take the risk." After discussing the details, they called Detective Harris and explained their plan. He was hesitant but understood their desperation. "We'll have officers in place, ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble," he assured them. They decided to use the diner as the setting for their trap. It was a familiar place, and Lucy felt a sense of security there. That evening, they put their plan into action. Lucy went about her usual routine, trying to act as if everything was normal, while Megan stayed close, watching for any sign of the stalker. As the night wore on, the tension grew. Every customer, every shadow outside the windows seemed suspicious. Lucy's heart pounded, but she kept her composure, determined to see the plan through. Just as they were about to close up, Lucy saw him, a figure standing outside, watching her through the window. Her breath caught in her throat, and she signaled to Megan, who discreetly alerted the police officers nearby. The figure moved closer, stepping into the light. Lucy felt a surge of fear and recognition. It was someone she had seen before, a regular customer at the diner. She had always thought he was harmless, just another face in the crowd. But now, she could see the obsession in his eyes, the twisted smile on his lips. As he approached the door, the police moved in, surrounding him. He tried to run, but they quickly subdued him, placing him in handcuffs. Lucy watched, her heart pounding, as they led him away. Detective Harris approached her, his expression serious. "We've got him. We'll take him in for questioning and get to the bottom of this." Lucy felt a wave of relief wash over her. The nightmare was finally over. She turned to Megan, who hugged her tightly. "You did it, Lucy. It's over." But as they walked back to Megan's apartment, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The relief was tempered by a lingering sense of unease, a dark shadow in the back of her mind. She knew that the stalker's capture was just the beginning, and that the true horror of his obsession was yet to be revealed. Chapter 7: Unmasking the Lurker. The following days were a whirlwind of police interviews and media attention. Lucy felt both relieved and overwhelmed as the investigation into her stalker's motives unfolded. Detective Harris kept her updated, but the more she learned, the more unsettling the situation became. The man they had arrested, Andrew Blake, was quiet and unassuming. He had no prior criminal record, no history of violence, and nothing that would have marked him as a potential threat. As the police delved deeper, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of behavior. "Blake has been stalking you for months," Harris explained during one of their meetings. "He kept detailed notes on your daily routine, collected personal items, and even took photographs of you without your knowledge. His obsession runs deep, and he's been very careful to stay under the radar." Lucy shivered, the reality of the situation sinking in. "Did he say why? Why me?" Harris sighed, his expression grim. "He claims he was drawn to you, that he felt a connection. In his mind, he believed you were meant to be together. It's a classic case of delusional fixation." Lucy's stomach churned. The idea that someone had been watching her so closely, invading her privacy, was horrifying. "What happens now?" "Blake will face charges for stalking and harassment, among other things," Harris replied. "We're also looking into whether he has other victims. For now, I'd suggest you continue to stay with friends or family and avoid being alone as much as possible." Lucy nodded, her mind racing. The nightmare seemed to be over, but she couldn't shake the lingering fear that something was still amiss. She returned to Megan's apartment, trying to resume a sense of normalcy, but the shadows in her mind remained. That evening, as they were watching television and drinking wine, Megan turned to her. "Lucy, I've been thinking. What if Blake wasn't working alone? What if there's someone else involved?" The thought sent a chill down Lucy's spine. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," Megan continued. "Blake didn't seem too bright, but he's been obsessed with you for months. What if someone else was helping him, someone who knew how to stay hidden and keep him in check?" Lucy felt a surge of anxiety. But who? And why? Megan shook her head. I don't know, but it's worth considering. We should be extra careful until we're sure. At that moment, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that Megan might be right. Later, as they were preparing for bed, Lucy's phone rang. It was Detective Harris. Lucy, I need to speak with you. It's urgent, he said, his tone serious. Lucy's heart pounded. What is it, Detective? Can I come over? It's better if we discuss this in person, he replied. Okay, Lucy agreed, her anxiety spiking. She hung up and turned to Megan. Harris is coming over. He says it's urgent. Megan nodded, her expression concerned. Let's stay calm and see what he has to say. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Lucy and Megan exchanged a nervous glance before Megan got up to answer it. She peered through the peephole and saw Harris standing outside. She opened the door and let him in. Harris stepped inside, his expression grim. I have some important news, he began, but before he could say more, he suddenly lunged at Megan, striking her hard across the head. Megan crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Lucy screamed, backing away in horror. What are you doing? She cried. Harris straightened up, his face twisting into a maniacal grin. Oh, Lucy, he said, his voice dripping with malice. You really don't remember me, do you? Lucy's mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Who are you? She demanded, her voice trembling. He took a step closer, his eyes wild and unhinged. It's me, David. David Hart. You ignored me back in our old town, and now, you didn't even recognize me. But I bet you'll remember me now. Lucy's eyes widened in shock. David? The quiet, unassuming creepy neighbor from her old hometown. She barely remembered him, but the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. He had changed his hair color, lost weight, and even wore colored contacts, turning him into this man named Harris. You're insane, she whispered, fear and anger mixing in her voice. David laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down her spine. Insane? No, Lucy. I'm just devoted. I've been watching you, protecting you, making sure you were safe. I knew Blake could bring us closer, and now, you're finally paying attention to me. Lucy's survival instincts kicked in. She needed to escape, to fight back. She glanced around the room, looking for anything she could use as a weapon. Her eyes landed on a lamp on the nearby table. David moved closer, his expression menacing. You can't run from me, Lucy. We're meant to be together. With a burst of adrenaline, Lucy grabbed the lamp and swung it at David. He dodged, but she managed to hit him on the shoulder, making him stumble. She took the opportunity to run, but David quickly recovered and lunged at her, grabbing her by the arm. A struggle ensued, each of them fighting for control. David was stronger, but Lucy's fear and determination gave her an edge. She broke free and ran toward the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the counter. David followed, his eyes gleaming with madness. You can't escape, Lucy. I won't let you. Lucy held the knife in front of her, her hands shaking. Stay back, David. I'm warning you. He laughed again, a sound that made her blood run cold. What are you going to do, Lucy? Kill me? You don't have it in you. In a desperate move, Lucy lunged forward, stabbing him in the leg. David howled in pain, giving Lucy a moment to grab the half-full wine bottle on the counter. She swung it with all her might, striking him on the head and shattering it to pieces. David collapsed to the floor, unconscious. Lucy stood there, panting, her body trembling with fear and adrenaline. She quickly ran to Megan, checking her pulse and sighing in relief when she found it steady. Grabbing her phone, she called the police, her voice shaking as she explained what had happened. Within minutes, officers arrived and took David into custody. Lucy and Megan were taken to the hospital for evaluation, and once they were cleared, they were brought to the police station. At the station, Lucy watched through the one-way glass as David, now handcuffed and disheveled, sat in the interrogation room. The detective questioned him, his voice stern. "Why did you do it?" the detective demanded. David looked up, his eyes still filled with that unsettling obsession. "Because she's special. She always was. Blake saw it too, and we wanted to be a part of her life, to protect her." The detective shook his head in disgust. "You call stalking and attacking her protection? You're delusional." David's smile was eerie. "You don't understand. None of you do. But Lucy will. She'll see that I was only trying to keep her safe and that we were meant to be together." As Harris continued the interrogation, Lucy felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. The nightmare was finally over, but the scars it left behind would take time to heal. She turned to Megan, who was sitting beside her. "Thank you," Lucy said quietly, tears in her eyes. "I couldn't have done this without you." Megan squeezed her hand, her own eyes filled with tears. "We'll get through this together. One step at a time." Chapter 8, Moving Forward. Weeks turned into months, and the traumatic events began to fade into the background of Lucy's life. With David behind bars, she slowly started to reclaim her sense of normalcy. The process was not easy, the shadows of her past lingered, but each day brought new hope and strength. Lucy continued to stay with Megan for a while, finding comfort and support in their friendship. They both attended therapy sessions to help cope with the aftermath, and their bond grew even stronger. The city that once seemed filled with lurking dangers gradually began to feel like home again. One sunny morning, Lucy decided to take a walk through the park. The air was crisp, the sky a clear blue, and the vibrant colors of the blooming flowers filled her with a sense of peace. She took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her body slowly unwind. The park had always been one of her favorite places, and today, it felt like a symbol of her renewed strength and resilience. As she walked, she noticed familiar faces, people from the neighborhood who had become part of her daily life. She smiled and waved, feeling a genuine connection to the community that had rallied around her during her darkest times. Lucy reached a bench by the lake and sat down, watching the ducks glide across the water. She pulled out a journal from her bag, something her therapist had recommended to help process her thoughts and feelings. As she wrote, she reflected on how far she had come. "Dear Journal," she began, "it's been a journey, but I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. The fear is still there, but it no longer controls me. I've learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew, and I have the people around me to thank for that." She paused, looking out at the peaceful scene before her. "Megan has been my rock. Without her, I don't know how I would have survived. She showed me that there are still good people in the world, people who care and want to help." Lucy closed the journal and put it back in her bag. She felt a sense of closure, a readiness to move forward with her life. As she stood up, she spotted Megan walking toward her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Hey there," Megan called out, a smile lighting up her face. "I thought you might need a pick-me-up." Lucy smiled, her heart warming at the sight of her friend. "You know me so well." They sat together on the bench, sipping their coffee and chatting about their plans for the future. Megan was planning a trip to Europe, something she had always dreamed of, and Lucy had decided to enroll in a photography course, rekindling a passion she had set aside. As they talked, Lucy realized that life was moving forward, and so was she. The shadows of her past would always be a part of her, but they no longer defined her. She had faced her fears and come out stronger on the other side. "To new beginnings," Megan said, raising her coffee cup in a toast. "To new beginnings," Lucy echoed, clinking her cup against Megan's. The rest of the day was filled with laughter and light-hearted conversation. They returned to Megan's apartment, the sense of safety and camaraderie strong between them. As the evening approached, Megan had to run an errand, leaving Lucy alone for a while. Lucy decided to tidy up a bit, wanting to do something nice for Megan. While she was putting things away, she realized she needed a pen to jot down a note. Remembering Megan kept some supplies in her room, she headed there. As she entered Megan's room, a strange feeling washed over her. Something felt off, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. She opened the top drawer of Megan's desk, expecting to find pens and paper. Instead, her eyes widened in shock. Inside the drawer was a stack of notes, each one bearing the same message, "I see you," written over and over again, as if someone had been practicing the phrase. Underneath the notes were photos, hundreds of photos, of Lucy, taken without her knowledge. Some were from recent days, others from months ago. Panic surged through her as she realized what this meant. Megan had been stalking her. All this time, she had trusted Megan, confided in her, and relied on her for support, only to discover this horrifying truth. Her heart raced as she stepped back, trying to make sense of it all. How could Megan have done this? Why? Just then, she heard a voice from behind her. "I see you found my little collection," Megan said, her tone calm but with an edge that sent chills down Lucy's spine. Lucy turned around slowly, her eyes wide with fear. "Megan, why?" Megan stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction. "You never noticed me. I was always there, always watching. David and Blake. They were nuisances. They noticed someone else stalking you and thought they could take you from me. But now that they're out of the way, you're mine. You always have been." Lucy's mind raced, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. She backed away, her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. "Megan, please. We're friends. You don't have to do this." Megan's smile widened, her expression one of twisted delight. "Oh, Lucy. We're more than friends. We're meant to be together. And now, with those two men out of the way, nothing can keep us apart." Lucy's back hit the wall, her mind screaming for a way to escape. But Megan kept advancing, her intentions clear. The room seemed to close in around her, the shadows deepening as Megan's true nature was revealed. And as Megan reached out, her voice filled with a chilling certainty, Lucy realized that the true nightmare had only just begun. "Now, Lucy," Megan whispered, "you're mine. Forever." The end.